That felt good to move around a little bit, didn't it? You know, we didn't used to do that, and we learned that that's a good thing to do. So you can't just sit but so much. Oh, I will, while I'm waiting for Julie, I will tell you, too, that the Janet Edmondson's books will be available in the room where she's doing her breakout session this afternoon. That doesn't mean that if you don't go to her breakout session, you can't have one of the books, but that is where they're located, so I just wanted to let you know that. Julie Sachs is our next speaker. She is the Director of the National Young Onset Center of the American Parkinson Disease Association. She began her affiliation with the APDA in 2007. She became the first full-time director of the APDA National Young Onset Center, and it's a center dedicated to meeting the needs of those who are impacted by Parkinson's early in life. Julie works with young onset Parkinson's, their families, and their healthcare providers. She has helped create young onset support groups across the country and was instrumental in developing a series of young onset conferences. I just want to add a parenthesis here that the only way we could avoid a conflict this year was to have her come here, because a lot of times they've kind of overlapped each other. So we got her on board here before she could plan that this year. Julie has a background in advertising and marketing and received her master's in social work in 1995. She's a licensed clinical social worker with more than 15 years' experience working with people of all ages to address a wide range of concerns. She's comfortable discussing the physical, psychological, and situational concerns that often accompany PD. You want to tell them your title, or shall I? The title is old, the new young. So everybody wants to know what's young, so now we're going to find out. Okay.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here with you all. Like Susan said, the title of this presentation, the first question I'm always asked is, what is young? And if you're like anyone else, you're hearing really the whole world start to ask that question. So I'm going to start out by telling you, let me figure out how to work this. Yes. So I'm going to start out by telling you a very, very short story. Once upon a time, old was old, and young was young. And that's the end of the story. No. But today, it can be a little bit hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. You may also have heard something like this, that 40 is the new 50. But it doesn't end there. We're hearing things like 40 is the new 30, 60 is the new 50. Sometimes it jumps in years of 20. 70 is the new 50. And it continues past age. Slow is the new fast. That's a good one for Parkinson's disease. And old is the new young. And so on, and so on, and so on. So what is this age craze all about? Well, you have probably heard that the baby boomers who are aging and who are now going to be what used to be considered sort of a senior citizen is really, I think, partly responsible for this focus on age and aging. The baby boomers are those who were born between the ages of between the years of 1946 and 1964. So people in their 50s and 60s at this time. How many boomers do we have in the room? Okay. As a group, baby boomers really have redefined aging. They are really identified with younger versus older people, especially considering what their parents were like at this age. Very, very different. They tend to be more engaged and Janet, you were talking about getting onto Facebook and things like that. It's a much more technologically savvy group than it has ever been in the past. And not only are baby boomers tending to postpone retirement, they're sometimes retiring and then starting their own company, going into a different profession, going back to school. So a much more active and engaged population. But it's not just the baby boomers. We also have what's called Generation X, which I am apparently part of. And the date range for these can change depending on the source. It's a little bit unclear. But generally, it's people who were born between the dates of 1965 and either 1979 or 1983. People in their 40s and 50s right now. And it's, as a group, people who are kind of resisting aging. I'll say we, since it's my group, tend to want to stay looking young, feeling young, acting young. And it's a group that, not me personally, but I've seen a few articles about how the idea of plastic surgery, much more acceptable among this group of people than ever in the past. So a real focus on staying young. And then there's Generation Y, which is generally people in their 20s and 30s. Teens and 20s. And it's a group that's tending to embrace anti-aging techniques. So this is a group that, it's a good thing. It's focused on diet and exercise, which we should all be aware of, but also tending to create a new consumerism around anti-aging products. And so when you look at all of this as a whole, we see how sort of focused on age we've become as an entire society. What does that mean for young onset? How is young onset defined, and what does young mean? Well, when you look at age, there's a couple of different ways you can define young onset Parkinson's disease. You can define it chronologically, based on age, or psychologically. And Janet mentioned earlier today the power of the mind and mindset, and I think that's important. I think we have young and how you feel, young at heart. And so I think that's a credible way of defining it in many cases. Basically, the way that I describe the answer to this question is that there's a medical definition of Parkinson's disease and a more practical definition. So medically, the diagnosis of young onset Parkinson's disease is given to someone who is diagnosed under the age of 40. Oftentimes, you'll see it in articles written as under the age of 50. So it just depends on the source. In our center, we go a little further in defining it and try to not focus so much on age, but combine the factor of age with practicality, I guess. So are you working full-time? Are you still raising children? Are you still trying to work to put those children through school? Or are they back living with you and you're supporting them? And so there's a number of different factors. There's also an important distinction that I want to make. There's early stage Parkinson's and early age Parkinson's, and they're different. Everyone, no matter your age, will go through early stage Parkinson's disease, but not everyone will have early age or early onset diagnosis. So in addition to age, Well, there's one other thing I want to say about age. There's also, with regard to chronological age, there's the age that you're diagnosed and the age that you are currently. Okay? So you could currently be 75, but have been diagnosed at 55. Are you young onset? I would say yes. In our center, what we find is that people who are diagnosed young tend to, forever after, prefer to get their information from our center and prefer to be involved with maybe a young onset support group. Now, those young onset support groups, which I'll talk about a little bit later, sort of have to evolve over time. And my favorite is the group that had to create a young onset group to accommodate for that, but that's okay. So in addition to age, we consider things like activity level. How active are you? Are you working, like I said? The age of your family. Do you have young children? And attitude. Do you feel young? And if you think you are young onset, you may be. And I would encourage you to call us. And if you have questions about whether or not you're young, you know, we'll talk about your lifestyle. It's really a lifestyle question. There are some really practical ways that young onset is different from onset later in life. The first is that there tends to be a different presenting concerns. So a lot of times younger people will have dystonia, more dystonia kinds of symptoms. They may or may not have a tremor. About a third of people never have a tremor with Parkinson's. And so especially if you've got somebody younger, a neurologist isn't really even thinking Parkinson's disease. And then there's, you know, something that seems like bursitis in your shoulder or some sort of orthopedic concern. And so there's a tendency for young people to go through really many years, sometimes 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer, of a diagnosis process that can be really challenging because it doesn't present as one might expect. There's also different psychosocial and psychological concerns, partly because of lifestyle, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. We've heard a little bit about levodopa-related dyskinesias, so the treatment can be a little bit different. Oftentimes we want to do levodopa-sparing strategies and start with a different medication, a dopamine agonist. Generally, although it's different for every person, generally young onset has a slower, smoother course and slower progression of the illness. And more than a dementia, what I hear from people that are younger is that they have difficulty with multitasking, with sort of a mental fogginess, and that often is the most challenging thing about continuing to work. It's not the movement symptoms or the motor symptoms. It's sort of a lack of mental clarity. And what that is the executive functioning difficulties that come along with the disease. And finally, balance problems, which we've heard about today, tend not to be as much of an issue, especially at the beginning. They tend to become an issue more at the later stages. So I said I would talk a little bit more about the psychosocial and psychological concerns because in so many ways the disease is very similar. It's the psychological and psychosocial concerns that are very different. So some of the things that I deal with most in our center have to do with employment. That's probably number one. A lot of times a young person will ask, how long am I going to be able to work? And before I say anything else, I meant to say, if you've got Parkinson's later in life, let's say 65 or older, I hope you're still paying attention because Because I think that as a Parkinson's community, everyone should know about young onset. It's being diagnosed more and more frequently, or recognized more readily. And you're in a unique position as someone with Parkinson's or who has a family member with Parkinson's to come in contact with somebody younger, or to hear, oh, my friend was diagnosed and they're only 45 or 55. And so if you know about our center and our services, and as you'll hear as I go on a little bit later, we have really some services that are helpful to people of any age. So I hope that this will feel relevant to you, regardless of your age. So going back, we address employment concerns, not only when to stop working, but how first to keep working. How do you maintain your employment? Are there some things you can do to change your schedule or to have your employer make some accommodations that will help you work longer? And then at the point that it seems necessary or reasonable, how do you navigate the disability process, which can be really cumbersome and lengthy process? I also talk with people quite frequently about relationship issues, sex and intimacy, divorce, dating. How do you manage being single with this disease, whether you're very young and single or divorced or widowed and single? Do you tell somebody right away or not? So issues of disclosure, really, both in your personal relationships and in your employment. And then finances. How do you plan for the future? Are we going to have Social Security for the generations that are coming up? What if we don't? How do you plan for not only yourself and what you might need, but what your children and your family will need? And then issues of parenting. I've gotten, for some reason, things kind of go in cycles, and I've heard from a number of newly diagnosed patients in their 20s lately. So for a number of people, 20s and 30s, can women get pregnant? Do they have to go off their medications when they're pregnant? And so I counsel people on those issues, as well as just talking to their children of various ages, particularly teenagers, who tend to be really closed. And so those are some of the topics that I work with most often. And then the psychological concerns. You may know that depression and apathy are really part of the disease, not just a reaction to having the disease. There's anxiety, concerns. There's just adjustment to the changes in your life that are required, the loss of certain maybe future expectations. And Emily talked about the impulse control disorders. That can be really devastating for families, really of any age, but it's a particular issue in the young onset community because so many younger people are started first on dopamine agonists. And so we hear a lot about that. And then I mentioned the cognitive difficulties, and Dr. Short's going to talk about cognitive issues a little bit later, so we'll hear more about that. Lest, like my first point, I depress you, it's not only bad things that I hear about. This young Parkinson's community, I think, can be one that is full of hope and courage and perseverance. And if you want to be inspired, I encourage you to visit our website and look at the Your Stories page, because we have young people sharing their stories. And as frustrating as it can all be, there's typically great hope and optimism in everyone's story. And so I wanted to be sure and mention that. So how can the Young Onset Center help? We help in a variety of ways. First, by raising awareness, which I'm hopefully doing right now. by providing education and support services, and by raising funds. And the fundraising we do for two purposes: to ease the burden of living with Parkinson's and to help raise funds to find a cure. The message that we're trying to communicate with raising awareness is that of the 1.5 million or so people with Parkinson's disease, about 15% are young onset. Now that's going back to using the definition of 40 or 50 as the cutoff. So if we're going to raise that cutoff to 60, it's probably even a low estimate. So we have a growing population of young people. We also raise awareness through our website, which was launched a few years ago. And I will come back to the website if I have time, or I really encourage you to just take a look at it. It's youngparkinsons.org. We have raised a lot of awareness by getting engaged in social media, which like going back to the beginning, if you're a baby boomer, you should be on social media. And you should definitely check out our Facebook, our Twitter, and our Pinterest page. And just to show you a little bit about how we've grown. So as Susan said, I came on board in 2007, and before that, this center was run half-time. We only had half-time staff. And now it's staffed full-time, and in the past few years, this shows you the growth that we've experienced on our website. And so it's not that we had nobody in 2009. Our website, our new website as it stands today, was launched in mid-2009. But since the first year, we've basically tripled our reach, and it's still growing. With regard to education, the ways that we educate people are primarily through our website. It's an information-based site. It has tons of information on it. And like I said, much of it is relevant to people of all ages. So I encourage you to visit it. You can order publications, our booklets through it. You can do a number of different things, and it's basically everything you should know about Parkinson's disease. We do a monthly e-newsletter that's really specifically focused on young onset issues. We have a resource guide, and again, this is one of the things that is intended for young onset, but really has applicability across the board. So we talk about everything from where can you find prescription medication assistance? Where can you find financial and legal assistance? And all of the resources in every category are either low cost or no cost. Because that's what I heard from young people is, I need neuropsychology testing. I need help with buying my medications. I need help finding exercise programs, but I don't have enough money. Where can I find these things where I don't have to pay more? And so it's a really great resource, the resource guide. We have a Young Parkinson's Handbook that goes through the disease itself and also how it's a little different, some of the things I told you, but more, there's sections on planning for the future, parenting, all of those psychosocial concerns I mentioned. So there's the handbook. There's also on our website an articles and video library. Susan mentioned the conferences that we've done. We did 7 young onset conferences across the country over the last few years. They were all webcast. They were focused on a wide cross-section of topics. And so they were all very well-known experts in the Parkinson's world. And so if there's any topic that you'd like to know about, I'd encourage you to go just scan the list of archived webcasts. The ways that we provide support, we have young onset support groups. We have, I know, a couple of, at least in this area, and one of my roles is to help people start young onset groups And so if you know of anybody that would like to do that, if you need help kind of re-energizing a young onset group or transitioning, a really young group, we've got in Massachusetts, we've got a group that calls themselves the baby boomer young onset group. And so it really spans a wide range of ages. We also have what's called our person-to-person and caregiver-to-caregiver programs. And what that is basically the Match.com of my world. So you can fill out a short profile, and we will match you with other people that maybe have a family that's in the same age range, or that is, we can match you on a wide range of factors. We can match you on your area of interest. Do you want to talk to somebody about clinical trials, or yoga, or any number of factors? How long you've had the disease. And I usually try to pair people up with somebody who's just a little bit ahead of them in this process. So it's very much a mentorship kind of program. And a couple of years we started doing it for caregivers as well. And then we've already mentioned the young onset conferences and retreats. And then finally, with fundraising, we look to ease the burden and find the cure. The ways that we ease the burden are by providing education and support services through our information and referral centers across the country, like the one here, or in Charlottesville, and through our dedicated centers. And we have several dedicated centers, not just young onset. We also have a veterans center, and that helps people nationwide, veterans, who may need to know about the benefits available to them related to Parkinson's disease. When Agent Orange was, accepted as a credible, factor in contracting Parkinson's disease, that was a big thing. And we have the director who runs that center has done it for many years and really can help you access whatever benefits may be available to you. The other one that people often don't know about is our Rehab Resource Center. It's a partnership that APDA has with through the Boston University Rehab Department, Sargents, and you can call there, or your healthcare providers can call there for any information about exercise and Parkinson's disease. That's their expertise. They are a research facility and a clinic, and they can help you connect with exercise programs across the country, with specialists, physical therapists who specialize in treating Parkinson's disease. And so if there's ever a question about what you should do or how you should do it, I would really encourage anyone to contact the Rehab Resource Center. With regard to finding the cure, there's a lot of amazing research going on. Some of you just went to the World Parkinson Congress and were able to hear firsthand about some of the research that's going on into finding the cure for Parkinson's or finding new treatments. And I just want to make sure that everyone understands that APDA funds research, a particular type of research. We're very targeted in the research grants that we offer. And what I mean by that is that APDA tends to fund the most promising new young scientists in the field that just need that little bit of money to prove that they have a great idea, and that if they just have that little bit to take them to the next step, then maybe their next step after that would be qualifying for an NIH grant. And so while organizations like Michael J. Fox's obvious one funds these sort of enormous projects, which we need, with some of the most notable experts in the field. It could as easily be a young new scientist who comes up with the cure. And so as an organization, we feel like it's important to support those people as well and to really support that research. And then also, the ease the burden part of it is that even if there were a cure tomorrow, it might or might not impact people who already are diagnosed. And so we are also supporting and trying to encourage young doctors to go into the field of movement disorders and trying to specialize in that, because we do have a group of people that really need their help. Finally, I wanted to mention our fundraising campaign, which is Optimism. This is a campaign that was launched about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. And it's, I found particularly that in the young onset community, people really were excited about raising funds. They just didn't know how. And so this is one of the personal fundraising campaigns that you probably have heard about. You can go on our website and you can create your own fundraising campaign. You can call it whatever you want. You can invite whoever you want to donate. Send out emails, post it on Facebook, make it your own. But one of the things that I found most helpful about it is that it's also a good small group project. So a lot of young onset support groups, what I always hear from people is two things. Number one, I don't want to go because I'm afraid I'm going to see people who are much more advanced than me. And number two, I don't want it to be depressing. And I have found that when people add this component to their young onset support group, it sometimes gives it kind of a new energy, a renewed sense of purpose. And so the other thing that I do, in addition to helping people start support groups, is I can help support an optimism campaign. And so whether it's you personally, your family, or your support group, if you're interested in doing something like this, please let me know, because that's part of my role. Finally, I wanted to leave you with the idea that at the APDA Young Onset Center, we consider age to be just a number, not a definition. And so if you think that we're right for Yale, please call. If you don't know who else to call, please call and I'll get you to the right place. And let's see how much time. I've got a few minutes for questions, if there are any. Nope. If not, I may, I'm going to see if I can get onto the web, to the internet. Hold on just one moment. Yep. Okay, I was hoping, it's not working. I was hoping to show you, maybe take you through the website, because there's so much to find that it can be kind of overwhelming to navigate. I mentioned the Your Stories section. We also have a blog that Dr. Paul, who you're going to hear later, he's our blogger, and I think he has a very unique understanding of young onset issues. And so I would just really encourage you to take a look at that. He and I also are doing the breakout session this afternoon, and we're going to focus more on that piece about relationships, which is so challenging. And so I hope you'll consider coming to that. And I think that's all. Thank you for having me.